Hey, folks, we are back at NG Atlanta. I'm sitting here with John Papa. John, you want to say hi?
Hey, everybody.
So we talk fairly often, right, on Adventures in Angular. But you've been doing a couple of things here at this conference, and I thought we could talk about both of those. So your talk was about deploying Angular to the cloud.
Yes.
And I know that we've talked on the show a bit about using Docker. Was that kind of the main thrust of that, or have you changed your methodology lately?
Yeah, that was the main thrust. In the talk, I talk about how there's dozens of ways, literally, that you can deploy.
Right.
But the way I recommend folks go is Docker.
Why is that? Why Docker?
Because it takes a lot of the pain away of it worked here, it didn't work there, and just repeatable, consistent process.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, when you talk about deploying to the cloud, Docker can kind of go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a particular way that you prefer to do that, as far as, on your own server or maybe on a cloud platform like Azure or AWS or other things?
Yeah, so I like to first build the application on Docker locally. I like that trust.
Right.
If it doesn't work here in Docker, then I got a problem.
Right.
Plus, I also like to be able to debug it on a local machine. But then once you've got it in Docker, my preferred platforms over the last couple of years have been things like AWS, Google, or Azure.
Mm-hmm.
I work for Azure now
Right.
on Microsoft. Those three are the big three clouds. But there's some others out there, too, that
Yep.
you can use, some smaller ones.
Cool. So what does that process look like? I mean, the CLI does a lot of the build steps, or maybe
Angular,
using Bazel or something like that, which is something that they're moving us toward, I guess. So yeah, do you just put those tools on your Docker container and then say go, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, so I started like that, where I would just script out what was I doing locally in the Docker file.
Right.
And then I kind of progressed a little. I was like, every time I build this, I'm first installing the node on Docker, and then I'm installing the Angular CLI. And
Right.
It was taking 15, 20 seconds, whatever, locally. Maybe in a slower server it takes longer to npm install. Like, why am I constantly installing the CLI? Why don't I make my own Docker image that contains node and the CLI?
Oh, okay.
The only downside of that is I have to keep updating it when new versions of CLI come out.
Right.
That takes 2 minutes.
But
this way I can use my own image to do that, and my builds now are saving that 20 to 30 seconds.
Gotcha. So do you have that up on like Docker Hub or something?
Yeah, it's under Docker Hub, under my username, John Papa /, and you can see some of them up there.
Gotcha. So you just pull the Docker image down, make sure it's up to date, and then...
Yep. That's the first thing I do, and then after that, the Angular side's easy, quite frankly.
Right.
It's really simple, ng build, and then I copy out of the dist folder and you're done. The harder part is, depending upon whether you're using Node or ASP.NET or Java or Ruby or whatever,
Right.
NGINX even, what do you want to run that code on in the cloud? You've then got to set up the Docker. Well, you don't have to, but you should set up the Docker file to configure your server.
Gotcha. So would you recommend then, let's say that I'm doing Ruby on Rails, because I mean that's my platform of choice, right?
Yeah.
So I pull in Ruby on Rails. So do I do the Ruby on Rails stuff and the Angular build all on the same Docker container?
You can. You don't have to, but what I probably would, because I assume you'd then use Ruby to actually serve
Right.
that. So if it's going to serve it, they kind of go together. What I would do is what they call a multistage Docker file. First, I build my Angular stuff.
Right.
And it kind of creates a temporary image. And then I build my Ruby server, which I don't know Ruby, but I would build that.
Yep.
Have you do it. And then at the third step inside the same file be, okay, you just built those two images in memory. Let's just grab the files that I need from both of them and stick them in an image that I'm really going to deploy.
Gotcha.
It helps you. I like separating it because it helps me think about Angular separately from whatever the back end is, which we all use different ones.
Right. Right. And then, I mean, a lot of these Docker hosting systems like Azure or AWS or whatever, then you just push it up.
Yeah. Once you've got it in a container, it's easy. Because any of those major cloud providers supports Docker.
Yep. Or if you need, you need scaling, you need load balancer, all that stuff's built in up there.
Yeah, you can get into monitoring, or you can use Kubernetes, and scale it up or down.
Yep.
Lots of things you can do there.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of options.
Yeah, because maybe your website gets 1 million users a month, and one server is not enough. So now you
Yep.
got to spin up 3 of the same, and you can cluster them with
Yep.
reverse proxy.
Yep.
And if you're just starting out, you don't need any of that. Just create a Docker image and push it.
Yep. Makes sense to me. So you make it sound so easy.
The hardest part is getting the Docker file right, in my opinion.
Yep.
Once you get that, and this is honestly where it really helped me, maybe because I like simple things. I like to stay in my editor, and it's no secret, I like VS Code. That's my editor of choice for the last couple of years. And before that, I bounced around. But what I really like is when I first started in Docker, I was not using VS Code because it didn't exist. I'd have to go to my editor to write my code. I'd have to go to like Amazon or Azure to go set up my portal. And then I'd have to go to the command line to set up Docker. They have their own tools. I felt like I was bouncing around. Now in VS Code, there's extensions.
Yeah, it has Docker extensions.
Right-click, push the Docker image, send up to your favorite cloud. I like that.
Yeah.
So to me, that was just key. I'm like, great. I can right-click, push it, or use a command. Because I like keyboard commands.
Yep, absolutely. And it's funny too because it's all integrated. It's all in one place.
Yeah, and it's an extension. You have to install it, right? But it's, a couple seconds to download it, put it on your machine. Because if you don't do Docker, you probably don't want the extension.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So what's the learning curve on all this stuff? I mean, do I have to really understand Docker then if the extension's there, or do I just have to have kind of a passing knowledge of what the extension's doing for me?
I think you need to have at least a passing knowledge. I'm not a Docker expert by any means. I know people who are. Like my good buddy Dan Wally knows a lot more about it than I do.
Right.
Shane Boyer, another good friend of mine,
works
with me. I know how to do what I need to do with it. I know how to build my apps, how to deploy it. I know how to scale it. Docker, like any technology, has lots of deep things you can go into. As long as you can understand, forget Docker, how do you build your app normally? Then you just go look up the Docker syntax, say, okay, how do I install Node? Okay, that's this command, it's from. How do I get the CLI to build? It's ngBuild.
Yep.
As long as you know what you're doing, I would just go look up the Docker syntax, and the rest is pretty easy.
Makes sense. Well, the other thing that you did here is you ran Angular Fundamentals workshop. So what all is involved in fundamentals? Like when people say Angular Fundamentals, I mean, how far are you getting?
It's a good question because I run 1, 2, and 3 day versions of that same workshop.
Right.
So you have to, this was a 1 day, so there were things I had to shorten or cut out.
Right.
The good news is that within the first hour or two of teaching this, you have an app running.
Right. Oh, that's awesome.
So I try to do it where I try to break up to an hour where I talk for about 40 minutes. And through the presentation, I also demo what we're doing. Like in the beginning, I'm showing the CLI, how it works. I demo it, show some slides, because people like to take home slides. And then I spend 20 minutes doing a hands-on lab. So I'll have them go say, okay, this is what you're going to build, install the CLI, build this app, and I'll walk around. So every hour there's activity. But by doing that, whenever you do a lab, that takes time. So I start off there, and we talked a little about TypeScript. There's really only 5 things in TypeScript you need to know Angular. You don't need to know the whole thing, because that could be daunting to some people. And then I get into components and modules, services, directives, data binding, HTTP, and then we kind of wrap up with routing, which is a big topic.
Yep.
But it's important because a lot of people want to know how to do like lazy loading and for performance.
Yeah, lazy loading, and usually people are trying to build some kind of single page app. So, yeah. Yeah,
and if the app gets big, you want to know how to.
Yep.
Because the common question comes up, well, what if I have 1,000 pages? I don't want to load a 5 meg app.
Yeah.
There's ways to combat that.
How do you wrangle it?
Yeah.
Makes sense. Do you get into testing or anything like that, or?
Not in the 1 day, no. Testing, we do a testing workshop. Dan and Wallene and I do a lot. And sometimes we do some solo. That's usually a full day.
Right.
It's not the setup, it's more about how do you test.
Right.
Because you don't want to be testing like a property. Does customer have last name?
Yeah, no.
There's no value.
Yeah.
Is my component going to work if I don't have data?
Yeah.
Things like that are more important.
Gotcha. Well, cool. So where do people usually get hung up during your Angular fundamentals?
Different in every workshop, which is interesting.
Oh, really?
I'll hear different things, and I've been doing these for years. Some of it's fascinating. More common ones, honestly, some people haven't installed Node yet.
Oh.
That's a common theme. They'll come in, and maybe they're using Java or Ruby or .NET, and they haven't installed Node yet. So it's kind of helpful to know that first.
Right.
So that's actually the very first lab. Like, we literally open up the thing and like, first lab, let's make sure we have Node on our machines.
Yeah.
And it's not a long lab, it's easy.
Right.
But you have to help somebody. Other things are just when you're using the syntax, sometimes they get confused on where to put things. So you know how when you create a component, you have to declare it
Right.
with Angular. If you use the CLI, you don't have to because it does it for you. But I make people do it manually first so they at least know what's happening.
Yep.
And sometimes they put it in the wrong place. I'd say the most common thing I get, though, everywhere is in TypeScript, you import something, like a component from Angular.
Right.
All that is a reference. You're just saying, I want to use that thing.
Right.
But you're not actually using it yet. It's kind of like, do you ever call shotgun in a car?
Yeah.
You call shotgun, but you're not in the seat yet.
Right.
You know, you're outside. That's like an import. And then they forget to actually use it. So then they're like, well, why didn't it work? It's because you have to also use it.
Yep. Makes sense. Well, cool. So if people are looking, they're hearing, oh, well, you do these workshops with Dan Wallin. How do people find out where those are at?
Mostly Twitter. We use, we're low key. So we go on Twitter. It's John_Papa or Dan Wallin, WAHLIN. People have a hard time getting his name right.
Yep.
But we tweet about it a lot. We do them at NgConf. We do them at Angular Mix here at NG Atlanta.
Good deal. And then I know that you're also, like you said, you work with Azure for Microsoft. So if people are interested in digging into that stuff, how do they find you there? Same thing?
Same thing on Twitter, or you can go to aka.ms/Node Dev Center. It's a special link I set up. It brings you to how do you use like Node and Angular and React and Vue on Azure.
Good deal. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up this interview. Thank you, John.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too.